This is distracting. Jesus.
You just want to smoke it.
I know it's like it's getting me osmotically. I mean, Jesus.
Some patience. It's
I
like
can smell it. Jesus. Okay. Let me start again. There's a new sheriff in town in D.C. The governor of New York State won't talk about her greatest success. The mayor of New York, well, at the moment mayor, at the moment Democrat, maybe future Republican, maybe future head of the Rat Party, he seems to like weed, and the rollout of cannabis in New York State continues as New Yorkers burn it and sell it. I asked Carol Baines, activist, filmmaker, and owner of Tetra, the dispensary up in East Harlem, about what's been going on and where this is all going. Last time I talked to you back in April, you were in a death struggle with OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management.
Yeah. Office of Cannabis Management.
Say
that 3 times real quick.
I know. Over a proximity issue that they had made a mistake on. Could you go into that?
Actually, about 2 years ago, we submitted a location to them. Our location was approved. So we built out the location, hired staff, got ready to open, and then they got sued. So there was an injunction placed against the licensing process. And for 6 months, we had to wait. I was paying rent, paying employees. Every day I was asking OCM, what we should be doing, and was the card license going to go away? And they kept telling us just keep pressing on. Eventually the lawsuit would end and we'd be able to open. And it did. About 6 months later, lawsuit ended, and OCM started filing our paperwork and realized that they made an error in our proximity judgment. So we couldn't use that location.
So at this point, you've taken on a rent.
Mm-hmm.
You've been holding this place for
months.
Yeah. And now you've been told, after all that time and after incurring all that loss, that the place is not legal.
Not legal.
Now, this isn't because the place was visible from the street. It would have been a delivery location.
First of all, the way the regulations are written, half of the regulations were in the MRTA and half of the regulations were in the cart license regulation. In the MRTA, it's very specific. Delivery location does not have to operate out of a storefront, and no foot traffic is allowed out of a delivery location. The proximity requirements, which are in the card license, state that you can't be within 500 feet of a school. So we were a delivery location. There would never have been any patrons entering or leaving our location.
And again, from your location, it's not like you can look out and see a school.
Absolutely not. The way that the regulations are written, we were told that they would measure, but they would only ever measure in a straight line down the street. When they started taking these measurements, they started measuring through buildings and through backyards, through blocks, using Google Maps.
And on the corner of the building was an illegal dispensary.
Yeah,
unlicensed.
Ironically enough, at that time, the guy, like between the time that it took for OCM to figure out whether or not they were going to allow us to open in that space, someone had rented the storefront in the building and actually opened an illegal dispensary. They got shut down eventually, but for a moment there, the irony was very thick.
Now, none of this money was recouped from the city?
No. From there, actually on the last episode that I was on with you last time we spoke, there was another guy with us, Burke, who is the owner of, it's now the Flowery. At that time, it was Elevate Soho. He negotiated with, the Flowery is a bigger organization, so he negotiated that, so then now he's part of their organization. He's, I guess a franchise, you can kind of say, of their organization.
So did that help him out with his situation? Because he had some...
Yeah, it did help him. He managed to find someone to come in. They solved his money issues.
Is it still involved with Atlantic Capital?
Oh, no, it's Chicago Atlantic, which Chicago Atlantic, they still own his loan. So he has to pay back $3 million to them no matter what. The state at some point said that they realized that it was a predatory loan and they were trying to negotiate something, and hopefully they'll negotiate their way out of it. Right around the time that I was going through this stuff with OCM, Burke introduced me to 2 gentlemen, Matt and Ben, who were former OCM employees, who saw what was happening with the fund, didn't like it. Matthew was the guy who was in charge of sort of understanding the numbers and informed OCM that their plans weren't going to work. They were going to basically, their stores were going to fail. So they left and they started their own advisory firm, seeing that there was going to be, all the licenses out in the wild. There was going to be a void that needed to be filled in terms of how to get those licenses operational. So they started an advisory firm, and Burke introduced me to them, and I started working with them. And within a couple of months, we were ready to, we had a location, and I was ready to open. Coming into this, the state, like OCM themselves, set us up with. We didn't realize at the time, set us up with people who were like supposed to be investors because they knew they didn't have the program in place to do the things that they promised they were going to do. But the guys that they tried to hook us up with were all predatory. They wanted 49% of the license, which is the maximum amount under the law that you can possibly give up of the license in order to just start negotiating. And in the situation I'm in now, there is absolutely no equity at play. They have no interest in trying to control a license or take over the company. They are literally just there to help me get open and, enjoy profit.
Is the feeling that what happened with Card, what happened with the initial rollout, that something predatory happened towards this initial group of people?
I would say that, generally speaking, card licensees all feel like we were, I'm going to say cheated. I'm just going to use the word cheated. Like we were baited into the situation. We were told by the state that it was going to be one thing, and then once we got the licenses, every single thing that they promised us, they reneged on those promises, and then they started handing out licenses to other people, big RSOs, MSOs, landowners who already had property, without any worry about how that was going to affect us, how that was going to affect the market. By 6 months into having the license, they had done so much on their end that it completely devalued the license for a lot of people. There were people who were basically trying to sell their licenses for whatever they could get for it. That isn't to say that as a card licensee, I still am going to take advantage of this opportunity, and I'm still appreciative of the fact that all those people went out.
And you're still under card. It's still under that license.
I still have a card license, yes. I'm operating.
And so the new business will be under that license.
It's a card license, yes. So all of the promises that were made to card licensees, my business should open and still be able to take advantage of all those promises. So I'm very grateful to all the people who, there were years of protesting and going to Albany and talking to lawmakers and demanding not only legalization, but demanding equity, social equity. That's the reason that we wound up with these licenses. The card license program even exists is because New Yorkers, lots of people who suffered for years under the prohibition of marijuana, organized and protested and were able to affect the law and have them create a program that had social justice at its core.
Yeah, but it also makes the whole thing all the more egregious. I mean, because the fact is that you guys, the card licenses, and this is something actually, I won't mention who said this. I think you'll know who said it from what I'll say. This activist said, like, look, no one told these guys to be the first ones to go out there and put their heads up. I know, the first.
Absolutely.
And no one told you to be the first guys to put their heads up above the parapet and take the blows and go into a brand new market when nothing was settled, and which I kind of feel like that they took people that had been badly affected by the drug war, and objectively so. There's no question about it by anyone, by any political party that people who received card licenses were not badly treated or ill-treated. They took these guys and they just threw them to the wolves.
La Problema, absolutely. I agree with her sentiment to the extent that had I been any more conscious of the decision I was making, you probably never want to be a first comer in any industry or with any new thing. It's going to be definitely bumps in the road. The fact that the state made actual promises, like we were given documents that said certain things. So it was a difficult blow to deal with when we saw that all the things that we were told were going to happen with this license weren't happening. But that being said, I think just recently New York State passed $1 billion in revenue in overall cannabis sales. It's a booming industry.
It's the one bright spot in the whole state. Everything else in the states,
right. We all knew it was going to be a great industry. We all knew that the potential was there for this to happen, and the fact that that I have any sort of stake in this at all, I'm happy. Definitely still angry about the way that some things played out. I definitely appreciate some of the people who came before, who even while I was going through my frustrations, and they were the people who were sort of the figureheads at that time, like Chris Alexander. I forget the brother who.
So you still feel very positive about Chris Alexander?
Listen,
because he's been the one that's been thrown under the truck on this.
Yes, and I believe that he is, he was the sort of political sacrifice. I'm going to say, this is my understanding of the situation, and I might be wrong, but this is my understanding, that he had a plan, right? He envisioned New York State cannabis incorporating social justice and social equity, that later on it would become a big industry, that all-inclusive for everyone involved, but that the first group of New Yorkers who got to take advantage of legalization as far as being retailers would be the group who was most disproportionately affected by the prohibition of marijuana, which meant, typically speaking, black and brown people who lived in areas where they were over-policed and have, police records that show that they were disproportionately affected by this issue. I really believe that that's what was at the core of what he was trying to do. There were tons of politics, and there was all these, all of the money that should have been there, and the way that the governor decided to privatize the situation and go to Chicago Landing. Those are all things that I think were basically out of his control. And even though, like I said, there's been $1 billion in revenue in retail sales so far in the state, and it's been, I think, a year, not even a year and a half. And he was responsible for that, but he was the person who was thrown under the bus when the governor finally decided to get actively involved in what was going on. And her solution was, to me, not a great solution. Throwing more licenses into the wild when you already had people who were licensed who you didn't fulfill the promises that you promised them. It seemed like a smack in the face that they would go out and license, 300, 400, 500 more people without fulfilling the promises that they made to the social equity applicants.
Well, it seemed like a violation of the law to me. I mean, because the fact is that players who were intentionally kept out of the market have been let in.
So one of the things that I learned through this process is that even right now, our licenses are not law, they're regulations, and they still have to be incorporated into the law. The MRTA is the law. The cart license is a regulation that they came up with. It's OCM's interpretation of how to activate the law. And I'm just going to say it's $1 billion industry. I wish that we lived in a world where big companies who are already prosperous would play fair when it came to smaller businesses. Not going to happen. And we all anticipated the big MSOs, the ROs. They were already jockeying for position before the licenses were even, before the regulations for the licenses were even made. So, the lawsuit that wound up changing the cart licensee situation was something that was sponsored by those big MSOs. The guy who wound up with Charlie Fox in Times Square, that guy was a disabled veteran. He didn't have the money to open a dispensary in Times Square with huge neon signs.
Well, let's go a step further. Since we know the situation with every other person who's taken a more expensive location, one would well imagine that the most expensive location in New York City would not be, let's say, the most amenable to profit margins.
And that's absolutely true, but that's something that you probably wouldn't know until you
sign the damn death lease.
Until you sign the death lease. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that while on surface value of that statement is absolutely true, but I think that anybody who understands sales knows that there is space for profit in Times Square. It's just that you're fighting an uphill battle, obviously, because your bottom line is going to be so high, right?
And that's what you found too.
At the very least, I had the first day I got the license, I had real estate agents that had property in Times Square reaching out to me, trying to get me to open in certain spaces over there. We actually submitted a location in Times Square, and OCM blocked us. And at the time, they blocked us because they had a fun location, which became Charlie Fox. What you say is absolutely true. The profit margins in cannabis are can be very slim, and having high overhead, spending a bunch of rent and having a bunch of retail space for something that takes up zero footprint, something that you don't, our display cases could literally, just be this wall here, and that would be all the products in the New York market.
Yeah, it's really weird because what you find is that there's a big split in illegal dispensaries between the guys who did everything on their own, and their spaces are almost always much smaller, much tighter, and the people who did things through the funds,
Right.
the spaces are voluminous.
Right.
Like a lot of ex-banks I've seen.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. The way the Amherst is now, once you open up a location, there can't be another location within a certain amount of distance.
Oh, well,
correct?
that's another fight. So there's always, again, that's a regulation that the cannabis board came up with. I've heard a situation recently where it didn't happen, thank goodness, but the Flowery Burkcase location, one of the big medical dispensaries was going to open up like 500 feet away from him on Broadway. And it's only because the community sort of uproar about it, or people came to his defense, the local community board and other people, and complained about it, that they didn't allow that waiver to go through. Actually, they were going to let the waiver go through. The company themselves withdrew the submission because they didn't want to deal with the blowback from the neighborhood. But yeah, so there's supposed to be proximity. That was a thing when there were only 150 licenses. I don't think anyone was considering proximity at that time.
Well, I mean, there's proximity for liquor stores, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the more licenses you give out, the more density you have in the area, then the more you need proximity protection. You would think that it would be a relatively simple thing, but it's like everything else with these licenses, it's become complicated, and it's become sort of a battle for people who are being affected by it. And OCM seems to make decisions not based on what would be beneficial, even to the people who they put into business, right? So the fund locations would be the people who would be affected the most. They have the highest, they have the lowest margins of error, highest rent, highest loans, and then they're letting big companies open up in the vicinity and take sales away from them. It's like a recipe for disaster, right? There's no way he could possibly survive if a huge company that can afford to take a loss and drive the price down opens up in his vicinity, right? Like there's all these sort of weird decisions that go on, and then there's never any transparency about the decisions, never any transparency about who made the decision. Even with the waivers for proximity, there was no clear-cut method, that was explained to us of how they would go about the decision making for a waiver. It was just very sort of sort of bland explanation of they would review the neighborhood and see if it warranted, but how do you do that, right? Like who knows what the actual potential of a neighborhood is, or how many sales you should be making? Do they just make the decision based on you doing well, so that means that the neighborhood can support more, or they make the decision on you not doing well, meaning that someone else would do better? Very, very sort of confusing, and yeah, not a lot of transparency. So it makes for very frustrating experiences for the car licensees who have to deal with every day the regulations sort of shifting, and then OCM and community boards constantly doing things that are making it more challenging for the licensees, or making the licenses worth less. It has been frustrating.
How do you feel about your new location? You're going to be up on 116th and 3rd, right?
Yeah, man, we're opening in East Harlem. I love East Harlem. I live in East Harlem. I've spent tons of time up there. Ironically, I think East Harlem is probably statistically the most disproportionately affected neighborhood from the drug war. I think that we had like some of the highest arrest rates. I know we had some of the highest arrest rates. We definitely have struggled for years, and sort of proportionate, the resources that might go to other neighborhoods, we sort of don't get. But it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that's vibrant, full of culture, full of, super intelligent and sort of progressive folks that a lot of them just need resources and just need things to come to the neighborhood. There was a time when our neighborhood was like a destination where people would come up there and hang out. It's been through some rough times between depression that happened a few years ago and COVID. But we're coming back, rebounding, and I'm super excited. We're a cannabis-friendly neighborhood, so we should do well up there, and I'm very excited about being able to bring quality cannabis products to our neighborhood and be the first to do it.
Right now, inside of New York, I can't think of anyone who would want to go back to illegality. But when you hear the political Sturmendrang, people from upstate, they do talk about rolling this back. Do you see that as a possibility at all?
Unfortunately, the atmosphere that the federal situation is causing, the new administration.
So you're already feeling this?
I mean, I haven't personally, I haven't seen it yet. And I think, in New York, we live in a bubble. We live in a sort of liberal bubble anyway, so a lot of the things that affect other places, we don't see it. Even upstate, completely conservative up there, we don't really see the ripples of that stuff downstate. But I have heard the rumblings of people wanting to go back to cannabis being illegal. I'm just going to say about that the people who fought for years, they fought for a reason, and cannabis has been criminalized and demonized, and been put on schedule like being a Schedule I narcotic when there's obviously not that. And tons of benefit can come from the plant. But
again, when the Biden administration wanted to reschedule cannabis, the dispensaries, the license owners, there's massive pushback.
Yes.
Is there any chance of Trump rescheduling? Is there any chance of legalization, or is there any chance of larger federal enforcement?
I would almost guarantee you that within the next 4 years, within the Trump administration, that it will be rescheduled, at least rescheduled to Schedule III. There is a lot of pushback.
That would be far more radical than anything the Biden administration was talking about.
I think Biden administration wanted Schedule III also. I think towards the end, they saw that Schedule III was the most sensible way to reschedule. They do want some sort of control over it. All of the revenue that the states are making off of cannabis shows the viability of it. And like I said, it's a demonized plant that for no other reason, there's no reason that it should be on the same schedule as cocaine or heroin or any of those hardcore narcotics.
At this point, there would be no pushback from the licensee, from the dispensary community?
Yeah, well, there will be. And that has more to do with profitability. Like, the way that the legalization has happened in sort of pockets. You had California legalized, you had Canada legalized, and they had big companies that have managed to create big footprints. So each state, as they legalize, the smaller guys in those states are winding up having to push back against those bigger companies wanting to come in and create, monopolies like any business. And what would happen if you reschedule, or if you decriminalize it completely? It would allow state to state transportation, which would open up vertical integration. And not every state wants vertical integration, but once you take away the borders, it would be almost impossible to control. So every state would have to go to vertical integration.
But that's not the case with alcohol, though. Alcohol, we do not have vertical integration with alcohol, and
that's an interesting question. That's true, and it's something that was obviously done purposely. I'm just going to say that I think that cannabis, growing cannabis, is easier than, say, fermenting whiskey.
It's probably it's easier. It's certainly easier to ship across state lines. We do it now already.
So I think that for all of those companies that were startups, and typically it started with companies that were growing already. So being a retailer of the cannabis that you're already growing, it makes it very, very cost effective for a cannabis company to grow the cannabis that they're going to sell. And yeah, the more people you put in the pipeline, the more people get paid, but also it drives up the price of the product.
Yeah.
So we've seen in other states where big companies have vertically integrated, and then for everyone else, it's a race to the bottom because they can afford to bottom out their prices, drive other people out of the industry, and basically take control of a whole state's cannabis economy.
Do you feel that Kathy Hochul or anyone in Albany currently knows how to push this forward, knows where this is all going?
I'm going to say no. Kathy Hochul, whatever her intentions have been, it's been 2 years now since on the retail side, since licenses have been out, and it's been sort of one mishap after another. The decisions that she audited OCM at a time when I thought OCM probably should have been audited, but the conclusion that they came to basically hand out 1,000 new licenses, I thought was was horrible. And I mean, I understand what they were trying to do in terms of the economy, but you already had 400 licenses out there that were struggling to get operational, that you already made all these promises to, and for her to just sort of like turn her back on that part of it and say, okay, we're going to solve the problem by allowing big business to come in and prop the industry up while these other people get their stuff together. I didn't think that was the right answer at that time. So no, I'm not extremely confident that the current administration, number one, even wants to deal with cannabis. It seems like when the issue of cannabis comes up, she only makes a statement when she has to, and then she moves away from it as quickly as possible. I don't know if many politicians look at cannabis as a winning platform when they probably should. I think that it scares a lot of people to sort of to take it on. Even Cuomo. Understand the industry, and the industry will blossom. They just need the help that they were promised in the first place. The legacy market was already making billions of dollars in New York without legalization. Legalization should double that money. But you have to have somebody that understands and has the right mindset going into the problem.
When's your place opening?
Sometime in March. Yeah,
maybe so end of March.
Third week of March.
117th,
118th, and 3rd Avenue. It's 2152 3rd Avenue, and we will be open by the 3rd week of March.
Up by the McDonald's, right?
Right by the McDonald's, yeah.
But that's dangerous.
I mean,
there should be a proximity issue with that.
So East Harlem has always been famous for, we've always had good bud. Everyone always knew if you want to get Piff, you come to East Harlem. If you want to get Sour Diesel, you come to East Harlem. So I'm hoping that as we transition into the legal space, that we can keep that same moniker for East Harlem. That it's the place that you go
and the name
to get the best bud. The name of the place is Tetra East Harlem.
Tetra East Harlem. Harold Baines. It's beautiful and wonderful to talk to you as always, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, John.
Wonderful.